Here I am. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Kimberly's dad.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wepner.
You can call me Chuck, champ. You follow boxing?
No, I don't.
No? You see Rocky?
Chuck.
You don't know me.
You don't. Chuck Wepner.
Well, you do know me, but you don't know you know me. Once upon a time, I was the heavyweight champ in New Jersey. I was the best.
Hey, Dal, set my man up with whatever he wants.
And some guy named Stallone wrote a screenplay inspired by me. I was like, what?
It's the real Rocky.
I told you know me. A real Rocky.
Everything's gonna be different now, baby.
If you want to keep working, you're gonna have to stay famous.
What are you that meets the eye, Chuck Wepner?
Sometimes life is like a movie. Sometimes it's better.
Oh, Jesus.
Let's take a picture.
Look at you, like he's your girlfriend.
Come on, just push the button.
Liev Schreiber, welcome to In This Corner.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to start this out the same way I do with all the great fighters on my show. Because your childhood was a little different. I know you bounced around a little bit at humble beginnings, and reading your story, it reminds me of so many fighters that I've interviewed in terms of the humble beginnings.
Oh yeah, well yeah, we had some. My mom was a cab driver, not aspirationally. She was a painter. She loved Russian literature. Really educated woman, but we moved around a lot. She was into squats. So, you know, I lived in some, what I guess most people would categorize as rough neighborhoods. Of course, back in those days, you know, in New York, they weren't all that rough. I mean, things got rough sort of, I think, in the late 70s and early 80s when cocaine kind of hit New York, and that's when things got violent. I think before then, they were sort of ghettos. Lower East Side, ghettos in the positive sense of the word. You had, you know, if where we lived on First Street and First Avenue, a block east was sort of all Puerto Rican, a block south was Orthodox Jewish, a block north was Ukrainian and Polish, and a block west was the Bowery and the men's shelters. So it was a very colorful neighborhood, and I love it.
I mean, doesn't that sound like a lot of fighters, the way you grow up from humble and tough streets? And talk about your relationship with your mom. Again, in reading, my mom raised me by herself, but just in reading, it just seems like as you've grown up, that relationship, I think and feel, has impacted you more. Just a guess.
Yeah, well, I think my mother and my grandfather, her father, were probably the two most influential people in my life. Arguably, almost every character I've played in one way or another has been some aspect of my grandfather. But yeah, they were both incredibly impactful to me, and she was someone who had infinite faith in me, maybe to a fault. And my grandfather was somebody who was very old school and very good at how do I describe my grandfather? A really dignified, gentle, but tough. It was very important to him that I carried people's bags. Very important to him.
Old school.
Ladies first. I'd get a smack in the back of the head if I didn't open a door. He was that kind of guy, and that ended up being important growing up the way I grew up, to have those kinds of boundaries.
Your first time with boxing, your first memory of boxing, what was it and when was it?
I wouldn't say this is my first memory of boxing, but certainly my first memory of fighting was I was standing in a laundromat. My mom and I were doing laundry on 2nd Street and First Avenue. And I was talking to this, me and this other little girl were playing in front of a washing machine, and her brother came up to me and punched me in the lip. And that was like the first time I'd ever been punched, and that feeling of terror when he punched me in the face and the blood in my mouth, and how just completely overwhelmed I was by the emotion of that was something that came back to me years later when I started to train boxing. That really kind of illogical fear of being punched in the face was something that I was sort of interested in overcoming.
Yeah, it's a shocking feeling. My first pro fight, I never had any amateur fights. I went right to the pros. And that first time, it's like Mike says, everybody has a plan, Mike Tyson, until
you get punched in the face.
He gets punched in the face, and then it makes a difference.
I was not a fighter. I was never interested really in boxing. I was a competitive fencer. I really liked fencing. And then I had to fight I had to box in a movie, or I had to play a boxer in a movie. And I had the great good fortune to meet Terry Sutherland, who was a terrific fighter out of New York City and a trainer. And he started to teach me how to box. And I just loved it. I loved the discipline of it. I loved the people I was meeting. I loved the culture. I loved what it was doing to my body. And I don't just mean cosmetically. I mean in terms of reaction time. And as I was aging, keeping my pelvis moving, my glutes, my legs, my feet, the application of proprioception, neuroplasticity, a lot of stuff that people don't know about fighting. Everybody thinks it's about punching. It's all about how you move. It comes from the ground up, your connection to the ground, and all that stuff was really, really valuable for me. And then as I started to know more about fighting, to watch real artists, real brilliant fighters was a thing of beauty to me and extraordinary.
What about as far as fighters themselves? When you were coming up, any guys you watched, paid a lot of attention to? Your favorite fighter?
Well, right now I'm kind of all about Vasily Lomachenko. I just think he's remarkable. But ironically, who he reminds me most of was my favorite fighter, Pernell Whitaker. I just loved that elusiveness. I mean, Floyd has a lot of that too. And, it's another thing that I loved about Manny too, is that Manny would hit you 5 times and then jump around to your side. And that kind of movement was just extraordinary to me. And it's like magic. It's like watching a ballet dancer. I like the big bangers too. And, watching Muhammad Ali outsmart George Foreman and Zaire is one of the single most exciting and humanist experiences I think I've ever had. But the pure science of somebody like Pernell Whitaker and now Vasily Lomachenko, watching Bernard Hopkins just talk Tito out of a fight was remarkable. That kind of thinking, that kind of intelligence that some fighters have. A guy like Hopkins, who may not be the most gifted athlete in the ring, figures out a way to get what he wants to get. Whether he's going to talk the guy out of his fight, whether he's going to step on his toes, whether he's going to spin him, whether he's going to punch him in the legs, whether he's going to punch him in the body, whether he's going to convince him to fight his fight. And that's what I was so thrilled to meet Bernard. Nobody was better at that.
I can't wait to tell him that, because when on my show, I get in the ring. I've been in the ring with 50 world champions on my show, more than anybody on the planet. But when I conceived the show, Bernard was the guy, because the things he did, sometimes a little outside the rules, were brilliant things.
It's that kind of mentality that the really, really greats had that. They were going to win no matter what. And if the other guy was bigger, if the other guy was stronger, if the other guy hit harder, if the other guy was faster, they were going to figure out the way to beat that. And that's what made it like chess to me. And I felt that about fencing. And it just seems simple. You're just touching, you're trying to get a point. But it's not. There are many ways to get a point. And I just love the sport.
Before we get to Chuck, let's talk about Ray Donovan. So much of the backdrop of Ray Donovan is boxing. And where did that whole thing come from? And you and John Voight do such a terrific job in it.
Well, I think this is a great tradition of boxing in Boston. The Petronelli brothers, and there's a great culture of Southie fighters, the Wards, and I think that that was an inescapable part of who we were as a family. And it was actually kind of the rallying point for us as actors in that first season of the show. We were all in the gym together training, and Pooch Hall, who plays my brother Daryl, is actually a pretty decorated amateur who fought Golden Gloves. So it was a great way for us all to connect as actors and as brothers.
Your work that we all enjoy, those of us that are fight people, 24/7, started with boxing. and talk about the development of that and how it all came to fruition. And do you do a lot of the writing for that?
No.
No.
There's a guy named Aaron Cohen who does most of the writing, who has collected a shelf full of Emmys for it, and he deserves every one of them. That was just a great idea. Ross, some years back, in an effort to get people excited about fights, came up with this show concept, and it just, right off the bat, it just killed. And, you know, boxing is so inherently dramatic. It's such, I think, what a fighter goes through in the course of a 15-round prize fight is kind of a microcosm of a life. It's this existentialist sport, and it doesn't get any more intense than that. And so it lends itself quite naturally to that kind of high art production value world. I think it's sort of the same model that the NFL Films guys used when they hired Bob Vicenda, and they used that great sort of poetry to articulate, you know, the titans on the frozen fields of Green Bay.
Frozen tundra.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that has turned out to really suit boxing, and I have been the beneficiary of that in narrating it.
I call fighters the most common and uncommon of all athletes. I'll just let you respond to that quote of mine.
It's a strange comparison, but the only other comparison I see is ballerinas. The level of dedication, the level of discipline, the athletic ability, and the lifespan of the athlete is remarkable. And that someone would dedicate their life to something as difficult, as brutal, as violent, as hard, as seemingly without reward, is a truly remarkable person and a truly remarkable athlete. You know, the more fighters I've come to know, the more interesting it's become to me as a sport. I think there's a stereotype about fighters that they come from violent places and they're violent people, and in my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth. I'd say that's the exception, not the rule. You know, I think like professional musicians, great professional musicians, they're actually quite sweet and a little bit even cloistered because they spend so much time in the gym to get as good as they are. So that was part of also, I think, what interested me about Chuck, was that there was a real dichotomy in him, of this very hard man who'd been through all this hard stuff. But when you meet him, he's one of the sweetest, funniest guys in the world, just such a winning character. And I felt that way about so many of the prize fighters I've come to know. How you doing? I'm Chuck Wepner.
How can I help you, Mr. Wepner?
A fellow boxing? Rocky? Tell Sly
John,
Chuck's here.
I can handle this.
He should.
Would you mind telling Mrs. Stallone that Chuck Wepner's here?
Is he expecting you?
What?
Is he expecting you?
Yeah, he's expecting us.
Hang on just a minute.
Is that him? Yeah, put your fucking hand down.
Oh, shit. Oh, my God. Hey, come here.
Oh, yeah. Hey. What? Do me a favor. Just hang back here a minute, okay? Wait a minute. Why? Just still on, all right?
Okay. Yeah. I cannot believe my eyes. Chuck Wepner.
How are you, Sly?
Better now. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time, Chuck.
Hey, thank you.
It's an honor, huh?
Oh, me too.
Hey, meet the guys, all right? Hey, guys, you know
how
Chuck
are you?
Wepner. Hey, everybody. Chuck Wepner.
How are you? Oh, no, please.
Let's talk about Chuck Wepner. I've met him a couple of times in Canastota at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I was lucky enough to be around Muhammad Ali a lot at the Fifth Street Gym in Miami when I was a little boy. But anyway, Ali told me after that fight that he developed this tremendous respect for Chuck, as Ali did for a lot of fighters, and as fighters do for each other. But he does say that knockdown, that Chuck stepped on his foot. I don't know what
I mean,
Chuck
there's
says
photographs
about
of it. You can see, you can see Chuck stepping on his foot as Ali goes back. Now, look, I'm friends with Chuck. Chuck's going to tell you he knocked Ali down. I saw the photographs. I saw the fight. Did Chuck hit Ali? Yeah, he hit him. He hit him solid in the body. Is that a knockdown punch? I'm not sure. I will tell you this. After 15 rounds with Chuck Wepner, the first thing that Muhammad Ali did after that fight was lie down on his back and try to catch his breath. I don't think he'd been pushed that hard by too many other fighters. And to go 15 rounds with arguably the greatest fighter who ever lived, and to continually move forward and take the kind of punishment that Chuck took is a remarkable achievement by any standard.
Until finally, boom.
Now it looks like Wepner may possibly have a cut above the eye. I think I see some red stuff that might possibly be hair. No, Wepner is cut above the eye. It looks like a pretty good gash, too. Wepner holds his arms up and says, "Go on, champ, is that the best you can do?" Wepner's a tough kid, there's no doubt about it. I have tremendous respect for the courage of this man. Ali has no respect for his ability.
All I know is they all said I was going to be done in 3 rounds. And now they're chanting my name. Sure, he was beating the crap out of me, but they loved it. They loved me.
Hey, John, you hear that crowd, Chuck? They love you, Chuck. They love you.
I think also something that people underestimate Chuck about and don't give him credit for was his conditioning. That man was a master of conditioning. What he went through in the Liston fight, the Foreman fight, you can't. I mean, people who don't fight can't understand what that is to have survived those fights and stayed up as long as he did. And that's why he bled so much, because he wouldn't go down.
What do you want people to know and to come about Chuck from this movie?
Well, I think Stallone did a great job in Rocky telling a story that I think is at the heart of boxing, which is heart and determination and tenacity and the spirit that I think fighters imbue the sport with. For me, I was more interested in this kind of cautionary tale about fame and how dangerous it is if we all believe that lie that is at the heart of fame, which is that we are the most interesting person in the room. Once we go down that path, it can be pretty devastating. And I think that fight Chuck had with his own identity and his own sense of his own fame is a kind of terrific metaphor for the real fight that he had with Muhammad Ali in Cleveland.
And is that why boxing lends itself so well on the big screen? Because in a nutshell, it is sort of fighters and great fights are sort of a metaphor for life.
Absolutely. I think it's particularly inspiring. You know, what Chuck went through. I don't know how many people would expose themselves to that. And I'm not talking about the physical punishment of being punched by arguably the greatest heavyweight in the history of fighting, but to be exposed to all of the horrible things that happened in Chuck's life, the drugs, the breakdown of his family, all of the really sad, terrible things that happened to him, but like a fighter, to always pick himself up and move forward is incredibly inspirational. And to beat that, to have that mentality, to remember that nothing, you can withstand anything. And I think that's why we love fighters so much, because they do. They withstand anything and everything. And in defeat, they are just as inspiring as they are in victory.
And I think you're one of the great pound-for-pound actors out there now, between the big screen, the smaller screen, stage and narration. You're doing it all, and you do it with dignity and savvy, and we're looking forward for Chuck, and we hope we get you at the International Boxing Hall of Fame soon. Liev Schreiber, thanks for joining us on In This War.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.